私を呼ぶのはあなただろうか。私は口惜しいが名乗れる名前がない私を今しばらくフィーゼと呼んでおくれ。
So we're finally moving on to the next waifu to be talked about, and today it's going to be the one that got me wanting to do this in the first place in terms of character discussion, Z46. This right here is a ship I feel that has become highly underrated, not only in terms of like character design, story, but also like usability. I feel this is just an all-around fantastic ship that gets largely overlooked. So before we do anything else, I'm going to show off real quick something I chose to do of her. I'm going to take her along with her sister Z1 to 10-1 and see how well they do. We're going to have a BB on the back line, and we're going to have Akashi on the back line, and that is it. And bear in mind, this worked out better than having Yorktown and Akashi on the back line and a front line of all, you know, 3 zombies. Doing a zombie fleet idea did not work out as well as this fleet right here did, even though it's 1 shift less. And no, it's not because of the BB being on the back line versus a Yorktown, because with the previous tries with the zombie fleet, it was the zombies up front that couldn't last the distance, ironically enough, compared to Z46 and Z1 here. I'll have other things I want to point out afterwards, but first, what poem? Both. I am Clyde, born from the nothingness, an image of steel given consciousness. Born into this world, I am a weapon. To guard the light of civilization, the purpose for which I was constructed. In that moment of starting Z46's secretary quest that I realized I was in for something a bit different, a bit special when we were talking about her. Normally for me, when I do these reviews of the ship girls within Azur Lane, we discuss their history to an extent. But there isn't much to be discussed. Z46 was a part of a classification of destroyers that the Kriegsmarine was once attempting to put together towards the end of the war. Z46 is amongst other types of ship designs that never fully saw realization, never being completed, never seeing a day where they sailed across the seas. It's from this very concept that they seem to play into Z46's character. She is questioning her existence, life in general, and she is searching for some kind of meaning within herself, hoping that there is something more deep inside, an answer that maybe she can find that she was never afforded in her prior life, if you will. This highly philosophical basis for her story and her character is downright beautiful. I can't think of anything better to say than that. It kind of puts into perspective what her character is like, and, well, there's not much else to say as far as the history segment of it. That definitely is a heck of a lot shorter than the Prince Eugen, gag that I did. But her character is where there is so much to be said. She constantly comes off as if she is trying to find meaning to herself, to her existence, and she's wanting to have a name instead of just being called Z46. It is amazing. And when you combine that with her character design, I can tell you right now, she is one of my personal favorite character designs. She seems to take quite a few influences into consideration from a couple different eras of German history, not just one or the other. And also, a very interesting fact that I do want to point out, actually, this right here is consistent on her other beach skin, meaning this right here is not like some kind of mark on this one singular stocking or whatever she's wearing. She doesn't wear two for some reason. Anyways, this is like some kind of tattoo or something, which is kind of interesting in of itself. But she just has a very, I guess you could say, complex design in some ways, but there's a lot of layers here. It's a plenty great design, to say the least. Takes a lot of like old, officer kind of appearance going on here. Old school, I should say. It's just something absolutely fantastic. But of course, character design and story is only so much to be discussed. People want something more than that. People want power. Well, where does Z46 stack in terms of power? Well, as we'll put up on the screen right here, if we compare her to an upcoming priority ship, bear you in mind, Kitakaze. She only has slightly less health than Kitakaze, coming in as the highest HP stat of any non-priority destroyer in the game. She has a higher firepower, more torpedo, and significantly more anti-air than Kitakaze does, only falling a little bit short more so in terms of evasion. And it actually turns out that for the most part, Z46 here, her stats across the board are actually quite strong. Having the highest HP, she is in the upper percentiles for firepower, and she's at least above average in terms of torpedo. But she also has very strong amounts of anti-air. Nothing about her stats are bad. The only thing that maybe holds her back a little bit is, of course, she's a gold rarity destroyer, so she comes in with that 10 cost in terms of your oil. But it doesn't tell the full picture. There's a little more to her than that. We also have to take into consideration her abilities. She does have a fairly useless one with piercing shells. Increases his ship's damage with AP by 25%. People don't really, people don't, AP sucks. Let's just be straightforward about it. But her other two abilities are something to discuss. Iron Ring Annihilation. When an enemy aircraft is shot down within your fleet's anti-air gun range, increases ship's firepower by 15% of its total AA stat. Base stats plus gear stats for 8 seconds. Effect does not stack, but shooting down additional aircraft will refresh its duration. Now here is the crazy thing about that. It's basically put your entire anti-air stat, not your base anti-air stat. And you have to remember, she has a pretty high and strong anti-air stat, and it takes the entire anti-air stat into consideration. So any additional anti-air that you get from, the anti-air you put on her, and any additional anti-air she gets out of whatever her main gun is using, etc., applies to this total as well. So the more anti-air she has, the more firepower she then hands back to herself. And considering how fairly high her anti-air stat is, that means her firepower stat can actually potentially go up by a fairly decent amount. Enough of an amount that she can actually start competing with some of the best destroyers in the game as far as a firepower stat is concerned. When you combine this also with her all-out assault being one of my favorite all-out assaults personally. Look at what this all-out assault does. Fires off a bunch of shells and some torpedoes as well. This is a very powerful all-out assault that she has. So when all of this comes together, this doesn't look like she's that bad of a ship, especially considering, bear in mind, earlier in the video, I showed how she was fairly consistently out-damaging Z1 Retrofit. A retrofitted destroyer was struggling to out-damage this non-retrofit destroyer. Take from that what you will. Now, I'm not sit here trying to say Z46 is like the best destroyer in the game, but she's a lot better than I think people give her credit for or realize. By the way, yes, mine is oafed. Z1 is oafed as well, so it's not like there's an oath discrepancy there or something like that. So, blah, 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 Zoe, we get it. You love her and think she's a great ship. What about the builds? I'm sure that's something people actually want since, you know, that's kind of a thing. Well, you can, of course, already see one of the two builds that we have up on the screen, and this is the one I had her using during the 10-1 portion of the video that I was doing. Now, for this right here, I mean, it should be pretty straightforward what we got going on here. Using the quintuple 533mm magnetic torpedoes. I just personally like magnetic torpedoes, but considering she has a decent torpedo stat and her one barrage, you know, procs torpedoes, might not be a bad idea to actually use, you know, the big quad torpedoes on her instead for, you know, damage purposes. And I personally prefer using the twin 100mm. This is a great compromise gun. It gives her a little bit of everything she wants and is after all at the same time. I use a autoloader on her personally for me because I like to try and get a little more reload on her so she procs more often, but there's probably better options as far as, you know, the main build here is concerned. And then of course an SG radar. I wish I had a gold one to put on her, but I sadly don't. I don't think I need to explain the SG radar. SG radars are just great to be having on your destroyers, kind of period. But I do also have the ability build. This build here uses Lucky Blue, 2 autoloaders, and its goal is to just proc her abilities as much as possible. And if this is paired with the quad torpedoes, like I said, this build can actually be pretty terrifying to your opponents because she will proc her ability pretty often. And considering her barrage is actually really brutal, this can actually be a very competitive idea to be running, more so than people might think. Don't sleep on this kind of idea. I'm sure there's some other ideas that would work very well for her that I'm probably just not doing here, and someone else might point it out in the description. Who knows? Go for it if you want to, but I just wanted to talk on her some today because I feel she is fantastic and overlooked. In terms of character design, I would give her an 11 out of 10. She's one of the better designed characters in the game. In terms of story, again, 11 out of 10. One of the better stories in the game. In terms of performance, well, if we give her a little credit for being as good as she is without being a retrofitted destroyer, I mean, she's easily one of the best non-retrofit destroyers in the game, which is saying something considering most destroyers struggle to be relevant without having a retrofit involved. So that's actually fairly impressive of her, but she does of course fall short compared to some of the destroyer retrofits that do exist because they're just so overpowered. And this might be my own bias, but I would personally give her an 8 out of 5 of 10 in terms of usability. I personally think she's absolutely a usable destroyer. She's just maybe not quite as good as some others, so she'll struggle to find a spot on your fleet. That said, though, I think she's still worth consideration. She can get the job done, and she's definitely a waifu. With that said, I want to show one more thing from her story. That isn't true. Words rejecting my existence as a weapon. Words that rejected the gray I had become. She sucks. Has her own thoughts and her desires. Therefore, she is human. I am not a pure being that lacks an ego. Therefore, I'm not transparent. Her sex should cherish herself more. Though my name is a borrowed one, I am still worth cherishing. Then I must know.
You feel fucking